Muskegon Area ISD Superintendent.
Thank you. Mr. Knight, we are required to report to you on the findings from the Department of Education on state complaints that were filed. And so in your folder is the 3 copies of the complaints and also a copy of the presentation being presented this evening with those findings from the Department of Education. I know that Mr. Bland provided you with a summarized version of those complaints, probably easier to read. We appreciate the time to do this for you tonight, and we'll begin with the district board as well in January. I'd like to introduce Colleen Parker, who's our Associate Superintendent for Instructional Service, or for Special Education Services. She'll be helping this evening and presenting most of the information that with Megan Perot, who's the Director of Special Education Instruction and Compliance.
I don't know.
Yeah, probably first. So I'll let Megan take it over.
Thank you. As Mr. Lindquist said, my name is Megan Perot. I am the Director of Special Education Instruction and Compliance for the Muskegon ISD. And my role here tonight is to share information with all of you regarding some state complaints that were filed. Before I start and get into the data, I do kind of want to just, for those of you who are unfamiliar with the process, give an overview of a state complaint process. So a complaint can be filed by anyone on behalf of a student with an IEP in any public school in the state of Michigan. A parent, an advocate, a student can file that state complaint, and they file it with the state of Michigan. The state of Michigan then reviews the complaint. They send an introduction letter to all parties involved, including the intermediate school district. And then they look deeper at what issues they're going to investigate. And once they make that decision, then they send an issues letter. After that, the Michigan Department of Education investigator conducts an investigation, and I'll share with you what the investigation looked like for your 3 state complaints. The intermediate school district's role in that is just to support and facilitate the communication between the parties. Once all of the investigation has been conducted, there is facts and findings. If they find anything that the district might have done that wasn't quite up to compliance, they'll issue that. And then they also issue corrective action. So I'm going to just take a little bit of time and go through what was found with these state complaints. So for this school year, there have been 4 total complaints. 3 of them have been completed and there were findings. 1 of them is still in the process of the investigation. So for tonight, I'm going to be sharing just on the 3 that have been completed with findings. To give you just a point of reference, I also wanted to share with you on the screen the history of complaints that have been filed in Muskegon Heights in the past. So you can see that there have been a few, but I just, as a point of reference, I wanted to share that information. All right, so I'm going to take this complaint by complaint and just kind of outline what was involved in each one. So the first one came in, and that number behind it is the reference for the state, just for your ability to kind of keep track. So the parents provided for this complaint 3 pieces of information that the state found important. 1, the parent said the district didn't hire a special education teacher or service providers for the school year. Now these are allegations at this point. The parent alleged that the students were required to stay in the self-contained classroom all day except for lunch and bathroom breaks. And then the parent also said the district held an IEP for the student without notifying the parent. Now at this point, this is just the parent. I mean, parents can say a lot of things. They share a lot with the state. So this isn't necessarily like what the state found. This is what the parents said. So at that point, the state decided this is what we're going to investigate. And there's a lot of information up here. I'm going to shorten it down for the sake of time. But basically what they wanted to ask is, when they investigate, they're going to answer the question, did the district provide the required free and appropriate education to the student? And they're going to ask, did the district follow the requirements in special education law under the Individuals with Disabilities Act, or IDEA, and the Michigan Administrative Rules for Special Education, which is we refer to as MARS. So they're going to ask, did the district provide the necessary personnel? And did they make sure that they were adequately prepared? And then did the district hold IEP team meetings with every member that was required? The second complaint came in just a few days after that first one, and that is what made the state decide that they were going to do a systemic complaint, where we're going to look at the whole classroom at that point. The second complaint was filed by an advocate, and the advocate stated the district didn't hire a special education teacher for the 22-23 school year, and as a result, the students were not receiving services. So the questions that the district, or that the state investigated for this was very similar to the first complaint. Did the students get the education that was required under the free and appropriate education, and were the laws followed? The third complaint is a little bit different in that the first two complaints were on middle school or high school students. This third complaint was on an elementary student. And in that case, the parent said the student was not receiving special education programs and services, and that the student was sent home due to not being toilet trained. There was a toileting plan in the student's IEP. She had some unique needs. And so that was what the parent alleged had happened. And so in this case, they investigated again, did the district provide that free and appropriate education? And this point was focused on discipline protections. That's a little bit unique in that it wasn't necessarily a discipline issue, but the state of Michigan considers any removal under discipline. And so what they were investigating is, was the student removed from the school setting based on a toilet training issue? And then the second one was, did they follow the IDEA and the MARS laws and rules as far as providing special education programs and services? So those are really the questions that were investigated. And then it moved into the actual investigation part. And you can see that the state reviewed a whole lot of documents, and they interviewed a lot of people. So they reviewed the complaint documents that the parents submitted, they reviewed the district's responses. The district uploaded certain information that was shared and reviewed as well. Student IEPs, any schedules, things like that. And then they interviewed the parents of the first state complaint, the parent and advocate of the second state complaint, the parent of the third state complaint. They interviewed the dean of students, the occupational therapist, the principals, special education director, school social worker, resource room teacher, paraprofessional, your transportation supervisor, and the pupil accounting administrative assistant. So it was a fairly thorough review. There were a couple of facts that were highlighted in the findings. One, they reviewed all the documents for individual students, and in the facts that the state complaint investigator shared, she kind of did an overview of the age, eligibility area, relevant information from the IEP, schedules, and then from the district, she shared information regarding job postings. They highlighted the calendar, and then they highlighted the licenses and permits of the staff as were provided by the district. So I just want to share a little bit that was coming from the interviews with personnel, and these are just facts that the state complaint investigator found relevant. Not that they were bad against the district or good for the district, just that these were the pieces that were lifted up when they decided if there were findings or not. So the dean of students, there were 9 facts. They were related to the students in the classroom. From the special education director, there were 10 facts. Those related to staff coverage, IEP processes, student schedules. The principal interview yielded 10 facts related to staff coverage and then again student schedules. The occupational therapist, there were 5 facts that were listed up around services to students and then the processes for IEP development and implementation. The school social worker, there were 3 facts. And then the transportation supervisor, there were 6 facts listed out of that interview that was related to how the district determines and communicates the specialized transportation needs of your students with IEPs in your district. So this is where kind of some notable pieces came out. Now, I'll be honest, everything that I shared with you has been straight facts. When I got to the notable issues raised, it was really long and I wanted to honor your time. So I picked out what I felt was most relevant. You do have access to a copy of all of the facts and you can review that. But a couple of the things that were important in explaining the findings were a couple of these quotes that came out of the report. The first one said that staff did not possess a permit until after the filing of the complaint, would not provided the student's IEPs, and could not have provided that specialized instruction that was listed in the IEP. In addition, the district didn't have a school social worker, physical therapist, or speech and language pathologist at the beginning of the school year. And then they said further, the student's IEPs listed general education participation minutes that were not provided. So part of IDEA and the Marks rules say that students should have education in that least restrictive environment, and we want them with their general education peers as much as possible while still getting a quality education. There were some general education minutes listed in the IEPs, and that wasn't happening according to the investigation as it came out. The second issue that was notable is that there were three students came up during the investigation that were not scheduled in the self-contained classroom and were not receiving special education programs and services. And then interviews indicated that no special education services were provided to students whose IEPs listed resource program pullout. So the original complaint looked at a classroom that was kind of a categorical classroom, looked at 7 students who had a little bit more significant needs. Upon the investigation, though, they kind of realized that there's a lot more students with IEPs that maybe go in gen ed most of their day and then maybe get a resource room classroom program. Those students were not getting any services either. And that's going to be important when I share with you what we have to correct moving forward. The second piece about the notable issues raised is that information listed in, and this is a long-term, present levels of academic achievement and functional performance, didn't align with the aids and services that are supposed to be provided to students, like the need for specialized transportation, breaks, and sensory tools. In addition, there were social work services that were reduced or eliminated, even though there was a need for direct service that was indicated somewhere else on the IEP. And then it said a convergence of evidence demonstrates that the district did provide the curb-to-curb transportation listed in the student's IEPs. That was one of the things that came up, and we found that the district was doing that, but did not provide the program services and aids in conformity with the student's IEP due to lack of staff. And I promise there's only one more slide of notables, and then we'll move on. The last piece, they kind of condensed it to say, overall, the district did not provide special education programs and related services in conformity with the student's IEPs. They did not develop the student's IEPs to address the unique educational needs of the students in the least restrictive environment, and they did not ensure personnel necessary to provide special education were appropriately and adequately prepared. And so the state found that as a result, the students were denied FAPE. Now, the other piece that is notable that is in the report that I lifted out is they also referenced a letter from the Office of Special Education Programs at the U.S. Department of Education. And it's in a letter, a guidance letter that was issued back in 1998. And the quote is that lack of sufficient resources or personnel is not justification for the failure to provide FAPE. So the staff shortage, while it is a concern, they're basically lifting out of the letter that it can't be an excuse. So we still have an obligation to provide the education for the students. So then we get to the findings. And if you remember correctly, there were questions at the beginning that I shared with you from each complaint.